The world is in the final stages on international agreement on how we will control the pollution of plastic that plagues our oceans, our cities, make sure that we have litter all over, and today it is found even in the deepest of oceans. Plastic is a product that we have made as human beings, which works for us. It is convenient, but it is also a product which is indestructible. And as with many of these indestructible products, it has today become a plague in our world. I'm Sunita Narain, and I want to talk today on why this global agreement is so crucial for us. So why talk about plastic pollution when this is really about how we manage it in our cities? The fact is, this latest agreement, which the world is negotiating, brings together, stitches together what is known as ecological globalization rules in our world. Ecological globalization are those agreements that are made on products which go beyond national boundaries. So the world has to come together to agree on a set of rules on how to contain, how to mitigate the pollution. The most famous, of course, is climate change. We've had the agreement on the ozone layer, where the world came together on how to control CFC, which was a chemical, which was then we found was actually burning a hole in the ozone layer. Since then, there are many other treaties, the Biodiversity Treaty, the Basel Convention, which is on hazardous waste transfer between nations. It is all about how the world agrees on coming together to live within the planetary boundaries. The latest in this is going to be an agreement on plastic pollution. One of the questions that arises is, can you manage plastic pollution by just controlling the amount of litter and garbage that is there in our cities, in our oceans? Or is there something we need to do more drastic so that the entire life cycle of plastic materials can be addressed? That is what this agreement is going to focus upon. We know that when it comes to the question of plastic pollution in our cities, we need to do more. That clearly is something that our governments across the countries of the South understand today. Cities understand that they are dealing with mountains of garbage, and this garbage cannot degrade over time. So if we pollute, it stays. That's what plastic pollution is about. So cities across the world are learning to do much better. They are segregating the waste. They are reprocessing the plastic. They are beginning to do what they can to be able to manage the pollution in a way that they have less litter in our cities, in our rivers, in our waterways. But they're also finding this is a losing battle, that we need to do something much more drastic so that we can address the nature of plastic pollution. And this is what the convention is all about. So what does it do? Because we need to do something more fundamental. And this is because the simple answer that we've always had is that we will recycle plastic. That we are learning this is not a panacea. It is not something that is so easy to do. Why do I say that? We know today that a small share of the plastic that is produced world over, that a small share of it is actually recycled or reprocessed. This data now tells us that it is not enough to only focus on recycling. The other is the challenge of recycling itself. In a latest study by the Center for Science and Environment, CSE, has found in the waterways of a northern Indian city, many brands of plastic packaged food in the waterways, in the river, in the city, which should have been collected, which should have been managed under the extended producer responsibility regime that works. Now we know that today the best way to manage the plastic is to first segregate. The other is to put the onus on the producer under the extended producer responsibility, EPR, so that they are bound to collect the material and then to reprocess it, then to safely manage it. But we find it is not happening, because if it was happening so successfully, you would not find the litter in the cities, in the landfill, and in the oceans. And most of this comes from the top brands which are under EPR. Clearly, that tells us that it is not good enough to just focus on recycling, however important it is. So this is why the plastic treaty that is being negotiated now becomes so important. It focuses on what it is called is Upstream, which is looking at how much plastic the world produces, and should there be some limits on it. Very contentious, because we know that plastic material is produced by top petrochemical industry, a fossil fuel based industry. It is not just the power of the petrochemical sector, it is also a question about what plastic material is absolutely needed, what is not needed, and how will we determine it. But clearly, we need to be able to minimize the amount of plastic that is there in our world so that we can manage it better. So Upstream becomes the first top focus. The second is midstream. Now, when I say midstream, it really means that what is the materials, the chemicals that are used to manufacture the plastic that we use. You would ask, why is that important? It is important because if you want to recycle or reprocess the plastic, if the chemical has very high levels of toxicity, it becomes that much more difficult to be able to manage it, to be able to reprocess it, to be able to recycle it. So the question of the design of the plastic material, the materials that are used, the chemicals that are used, and therefore the chemicals that are banned, becomes another very important part of the agreement that the world needs to come together on. The third part of it is really about the management of litter. Now, this is where the best practices on extended producer responsibility, what can be done more globally on EPR, and then, of course, the financing needs of particularly countries of the South needs to come together to understand, to make this treaty really effective and ambitious. Now, even as the world is coming together on this, we know that these are very tough times. These are very, very tough times. We are working in a world which is even more insecure, more polarized, more fractured. Countries are looking at every international agreement not to be able to live within the shared resources of the world, but to be able to protect their own national self-interests. That's what the world is all about today. But this agreement demands us to come together and to rebuild the trust so that we can come together on an agreement to reduce the pollution which is today endangering both life and also our health and, of course, ecosystems in the world. And I do know that this is tough. I mean, if you take the very issue of chemicals that need to be phased out or banned, the question becomes, what is the criterion on which you will agree on which chemical has what level of toxicity? There is no global criterion. And then, of course, countries are always very worried that are those chemicals going to be banned which go off patent? Are they getting into more expensive chemical manufacture? Is this affordable? But all this requires us to be able to dialogue, to be able to discuss, and to be able to understand the need for rules that will bring countries together so that we can live together and share the resources of this one earth. I also know that this battle may not be won exactly as we want when this final agreement is stitched together. But what is important is that the building blocks are solid. We need the building blocks of the agreement to be based on the need to take into account the life cycle of plastics, because we in countries of the South know that we cannot clean up after we have polluted. We need to minimize pollution. We need to prevent pollution. We need to make product and the design of products which are easier to manage, to recycle, to rework, so that we can work a more circular economy and be more efficient with our resources. We also know we need a more equitable and just agreement which brings countries of the South and the countries of the North together. None of us are enemies when it comes to the issue of plastic pollution. We have a common enemy, which is to make sure that we do not degrade our environment, that we make sure that the health of people is not compromised. This is why the building blocks of this international agreement need to be based on both ambition but also the principle of equity. But most importantly, we know that we have a common future here, which is something that we cannot afford to put at risk. Thank you.